Up as general business, which would be verification the meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Excellent, thank you. Next up would be opportunity for citizens to speak. If there are any citizens in the gallery that would like to address the committee? None. Moving on to action items. First action item is approval of minutes from the November meetings. Looking for a motion first.
So
Mrs.
moved.
Voigt, thank you. And a second?
Second.
Mrs. Ranchek. Any discussion on the meetings? Any? No? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None? It's 5-0. Next item up is approval of vouchers. Did we have any questions for the vouchers?
No, there were no
No,
questions
that's
this month.
clean. Is there any questions right now? Anybody have anything? No? Looking for a motion? Okay. Anybody? Mr. Como.
I move approval of the vouchers as presented.
Thank you very much. Looking for a second.
I'll second.
Corey, thank you very much. Any questions? Nothing? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. A third action item is approval of restriction of fund balances for health claims.
Yeah,
Mr.
Justin,
Clark.
Kay, if you want to come up. The ultimate agenda item is to asking the board to reserve or restrict, $453,541 of fund balance into the claims health insurance fund. This will bring us back to where we were 2 years ago. If you remember, 2 years ago, we used just over $900,000 of reserves for a bad claims year. So this will completely reimburse that. But also over the last couple of months, we've been talking about self-funded, and I said we'd do a quick report. So I've asked Justin from HNI, who's our consulting firm, and Kay, I think you all know Kay by now, she's our benefits coordinator, just to give a very quick summary of health insurance and how it works. I included in your packet the last financials where you can see under fund balance it has restricted is the definition, so you can see exactly what happens, where it shows up in our financials when we do a restriction of fund balance like this. You can always, as a board, undo that, but right now we never have, except for when we've needed to utilize the money for bad claims. So the next page, again, this is more the accounting side of it. I kind of created a flow chart of how this works, not only for you to kind of better understand it, but also for us to remember how it all works. So I'll just run through this very quickly. As self-funded groups, we talk about premiums a lot. We talk about how much our premium's going up, right? But really, we have a funding rate, and HNI helps us identify how much we should run through payroll. Essentially, it's a premium, but we often call it a funding rate. So if you hear the terms used back and forth, they're kind of the same thing. But as a self-funded group, you can make those funding rates zero if you don't want the plan to last very long, but you set that as a school district. You don't have an insurance company saying your premium will be X. Now, we follow what our consultants recommend for the stability of the plan. There are some districts in the past that kind of cut that funding rate lower than it should have been, and they ended up getting in trouble on the self-funded side to buy, whether it was a quick settlement or labor peace or whatever their goal may have been. But we don't actually, I don't think we've ever asked HNI to adjust the recommendation at all. So once those funding rates are established, and part of that is the accounting part, all that goes into payroll, and our payroll codes and benefit code and deduction code, the district pays for some of the funding rate, and the employer or the employee pays for 12% of the plan. All of that rolls into the liability, the health claims liability account, which is the report that Sherry puts into your packet every month. And then that pool of money, claims are then charged out of there. So if claims are good, not much money, well, there's always a lot of money coming out of it, but if it's better than average, the money sits in the liability account until you actually incur a true cost. those are the good years, and then you have the other years where we're upside down, where the claims are larger than what we are setting aside in that liability account. And that's where this reserve conversation takes place. At year end, we're asked to do a calculation of claims that have been incurred and paid, or just incurred, meaning someone went to the doctor on June 29th, incurred the expense, but obviously it hasn't been paid out yet because the paperwork hasn't followed through. And that's when we make that adjustment if we need to, if we're upside down that fiscal year. So that leads us to the separate part of, and what we're talking about tonight, is the designation of fund balance. This is pre-existing fund balance. We're just tying it to a specific cost. People like to see that. I think anyone who helps us insure, or auditors or credit rating companies like to see reserves if you're self-funded, especially when you're as large as we are. So you're being asked to, again, if you forward this motion to the board, will it be at $5.7 million, which is about 3 months of spend. I'd love that to be a little higher, but we can take some time to get there. It's not a race, assuming our years stay pretty stable for us. So that's a quick summary of the accounting of it and how that flows. And now I asked Justin to come and talk about the timeline going forward. How do we make a decision? If you remember, our budget assumption the last few years is the district will take on a 5% increase in funding rates or premiums. Anything beyond that comes from plan design changes, cost sharing, other adjustments to the plan. So we don't have those estimates, but we'll go over the timeline that we're going to follow, that we've followed the last few years to get there. And I will try to bring up Justin's brief presentation here. It's all of, what, 8 slides, 7 slides?
Something like that, yep.
Go.
Great. And you can just flip right into the next one, Darren. Thank you. So we just wanted to hit some highlights for you. What the benefit plan objectives have been as we've looked at plan design changes, contribution changes, and ultimately, we don't even like to make plan design changes and contribution changes unless we absolutely have to. And so we like to work on the infrastructure of the plan and look for inefficiencies and squeezing waste out of the plan before we even turn to those areas. And so we'll talk through what some of those have been at a very high level. We'll talk briefly about the financial and the benefit plan history, how we attack cost pressure, so we're not trying to wring that cost out on the employees' backs in terms of premium and plan design changes, and then the next steps. What does it look like here as we walk into this next planning year? So the benefit plan objectives have always been cost control balanced with employee disruption, and then to be competitive with other districts. Those have been our objectives as we've advised the district over the past several years. We've had steady employee cost per year. Our numbers have been very steady. We've kept it consistent, and you'll see that slide in just a second. Our cost pressure has really come from claims, the underlying claims between $50,000 and $100,000. So generally, you would see big blips and high cost claims or underlying claims utilization. Our pressure tends to come from these mid-range claims over the last few years. We've made some significant plan changes over the last few years. Again, squeezing the waste, infrastructure changes. In 2016-17 plan year, we put the HSA and the high deductible only as the only option available to employees. We moved to Navitus in the 2017 plan year. Navitus is our pharmacy benefit manager, and we carved them out from United Healthcare. I see some head nods here, so you probably remember that discussion. And that has proved to be very successful for us. We moved to United Healthcare's premium designation program in 2018, and the idea there is United Healthcare has identified quality and efficient providers, and we've attempted to steer employees that direction. And cost is always a trailing indicator of quality. And so to the extent that we can help incentivize folks to high quality providers, we would expect to see claims reduction as a result. And so that was 2018-19. And then in this last plan year, we removed the district HSA contribution, and we lowered the deductible and out-of-pocket maximum for those participating with premium designated providers. So what we did is we created a larger gap for those that didn't use these premium designated providers or these high quality doctors. So again, trying to steer folks into that, the more efficient providers. So real briefly on this, we just, we really like to talk about healthcare being insane, right? Our industry has not done a great job of addressing the insanity as it relates to healthcare, right? Healthcare costs continue to rise, and you hear these stories, you read the newspapers. It is what's happening, and there are a lot of excuses for not addressing those things. No time, lost hope, fear of change. No transparency, poor communication. The district has really attacked the risk and has attacked the just the plan itself in terms of squeezing the waste and trying to create efficiencies with what we have. And so we are not in this place, but a lot of plans are. And we'd be having a much different conversation if we hadn't addressed these things. So how do we stop it? We sort of look at this as the healthcare supply delivery chain, and to the extent that we can influence that delivery chain, good things will happen. So the delivery chain is pharmacy, inpatient costs, outpatient costs, and physician services. And really the cost is the price times the utilization of those services. And so to the extent that we can squeeze that out, we're going to be in a better spot. So what have we done in these areas? Like we talked about each one of these. In 2016, we attacked how the employees view the supply chain with the high deductible plan as the only option. And in 2017, the move to Navitus attacked that RX side, and we continued to massage that and work with Navitus to create efficiencies there. In 2018, we attacked the medical supply chain with the move to premium designation with United Healthcare, further getting at outpatient costs and physician services and driving people to the efficient providers to the extent that we can. And then in 2019, we removed the HSA contribution, and we created a greater spread to the premium designated providers. And then we also attacked the RX supply chain further by narrowing that network for Navitus by incentivizing folks to even higher efficient providers there on the RX side. So again, we continue to sort of squeeze that wheel there, and we build our strategy, we choose the tools, and then we execute our plan. And that's how we've attacked the risk here on the plan. These are the results. I know that's a little bit small there, but you can see that yellow highlighted line. We've been relatively consistent over the last few years on a total cost per employee per year basis. And you see that blip there in 2017-18. Some of that is attributed to just the Navitus rebates. Just didn't come in that year, and they came in the following year. And so you just see a bit of a misbalancing there. But you know, as we mentioned before, this is really, we've had a really great steady run over the past few years, and the things we've been doing have been working. What does the renewal work plan look like? You know, we would expect to have projections here mid-December. We're going to refine those again in January. We get claims data mid-month from United Healthcare, and so we're coming up on November's claims that we'll see in mid-December. So we'll have a decent look. We'll have a few months of data in from this plan year to help guide the projections for our next September plan year. And that's going to start the process for us in terms of what changes we need to make or where we can wring some inefficiencies out. We will have a medical out-to-market carrier decision done by the end of January. We would presume we would stay with United Healthcare, but we still do our due diligence and make sure that the network we have remains the most efficient network to be with. Budget number, we'd hope to have the budget number from the district sometime in that end of January range. We'll know plan design contribution changes if we need to make any there, mid-February timeline. We'd expect to have decisions made mid-March. The COBRA rates or the funding rates that Darren talked about, we'd have ready by mid-March. And then, of course, board approval on whatever plan we come up with on a date to be determined. And then we hit open enrollment time. End of April, communication content is out to the employees. The employee meetings hit mid-May. And then we're live with enrollment June 1st through the 30th. And then actual go-live date is September 1st of next year. That's all I had from a presentation standpoint.
Yeah, we just wanted to touch on a few of the bigger topics. Obviously, health insurance is a major spend, about $21 million a year for us. So we're here to answer any questions you have on the plan or the process. This has been the same timeline we've lived the last 4 years or so, at least. So all leading up to the open enrollment period in May.
Questions? Mr. Como.
Thank you, Patrick. Justin, what would you say is a healthy reserve amount?
That's a really great question because I think it varies per group. Generally, you like to see 3-4 months of reserve. Depending on how claims have trended, sometimes you like to pad that a little bit more, but we're generally in that range.
So when you, all things considered, because your company's been working with us for a while, all things considered, do you think that we're at the low end, the mid-range, or the high end of a reserve?
I can tell you, I'm not the one that came up with the projection, but I know the underwriter that did help Darren come up with it, and so we trust her opinion on where that should be. And so I'm not exactly sure if we're low, mid, or high on that, to be quite honest with you, without looking at the numbers, but we're comfortable with where the underwriter put us.
Okay. I mean, I'm definitely in favor of getting us back to the 5.7 and some change. I think that would be important for us to do, but I also think we ought to be trying to determine, perhaps at a future meeting, as we're doing our analysis for this next year, how comfortable are we at that 3 month? Is it something we should feel like, yep, no problem, or should it be something that we should maybe set a goal towards, maybe shooting for 4 or 5 months? I just don't have a sense of that. We haven't had, so is this our 6th year? I'm losing track of time. 5th year? 6th year?
6 sounds right.
6th year.
Is that when we flipped the switch? It predated us.
Yeah, it did, because
So-
it was,
Yeah, I mean, you've had data too. I mean, you got the data from the previous consultant, so.
yeah.
And 4 for sure.
I guess that was an assumption I made in
Yeah.
my one statement, so. So I guess I'm just, I know we had a couple years that were a little tougher. And so we're kind of I think the behavior of our district has been pretty decent so far. The results, maybe not the behavior, but the results have been pretty decent so far. But I don't think we've had a super horrendous bad year either. So, I mean, I'm just not sure 3 months is enough. And that's just, I'm tossing it out there as a question. We don't need to answer it right now, but I'd like to have more information to discuss whether 3 months is at the low end, the mid-range, or the high end of reserves.
And I think us coming back in hopefully late winter and reviewing that, I think it is a fair. I can tell you the year you can spend $1 million fast. I learned because we were running all right, and then we just weren't. I mean, it can just switch like that. So we can bring back some more information and.
Yeah, so our stop loss kicks in at what, $250,000, $250,000?
50 or 300.
And what you were saying is we haven't had too many of those. We've had a lot more claims in the $50,000 to $100,000. So you're trying to, we've been trying to attack that. But I guess I'm thinking, I don't know, have we been lucky or fortunate? And is this enough? And I can't answer that.
We can come back with a more formal review of that and make a suggestion for a target. Our target to this point is to get back to the $5.7 million. So we've had one the last 2 years, but now we're there. So I think it's a fair question to be asking.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think as we do these projections here, we can further refine those numbers and get back to you for the next meeting.
Appreciate it.
Corey.
Darren, I guess a question for you primarily, I believe. If we do, or if the board does recommend, or the committee recommends and the board eventually restricts these funds, are we going to lose any investment income? Are the funds as they currently sitting generating any income?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we have, I forget what we budget for interest revenue every year, but it's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay.
So yeah, the money is in a bank account. It's not
Moving
a
them up.
separate bank account. It's just on our general ledger, we restrict it,
Okay.
but it's in a pool with everything in the operational fund, so.
Okay, makes sense. That's all I had.
Anything else? Okay, well, this is an action item, so looking for a motion to approve the restriction of the fund balance for healthcare claims.
So moved.
Thank you, Corey. Second?
Do we need to be a little bit more specific? We're adding to it, right?
We're adding, well, yeah, we are adding $453,541 to get back to the one where we wanted to be at $5,772,252.
So that was part of your motion, Corey, was the dollar amount?
It was. Thank you.
Okay. I'll second that.
Excellent. Any questions? Comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? It's 5-0. Thank you very much for your time.
The financing plan conversation should just, I'm
We can do it right now.
trying to be, it could go very quickly.
Yeah, let's
so.
do it right now.
Oh, did you table me? I'm sorry.
No. You're next. We're also trying to get the town through here, but if you want to come up, Michelle, we'll just,
Yeah, whoever.
it's pretty good news. And do you have handouts? Oh,
We don't have any good news handouts? Those are the handouts we should be bringing.
Sorry, I thought it was in the
no, I thought, Michelle will bring, we probably should have clarified.
always do, and this time I'm.
Or why don't we do the town? Sherry can run and do copies. No, I'm sorry. I should have. And I even thought to clear. That's the original. That's not where we are now. She has a hard copy in her hand. All right, so as you recall, last month, we had a discussion about the TIF 1, Town of Waukesha TIF 1 proposal, and you asked that representatives from the town come and provide a little information for you. So we followed through on that, and so they have a presentation you want to walk through. I didn't know if you want the presentation or if you just want to do Q&A since you've seen some of the information and you had some information in your packet. There was a lot. I also emailed out a lot of handouts. I didn't include all those in your packet because I thought you only at some point you weren't going to read it all anyway. So, so however you'd
What do you want to do?
like to proceed.
Any objections to watching the presentation?
How long
No?
is it?
Well, I'll try and get through it quickly. There's some pictures in there and graphs and things, so it's not a lot of talking about there.
Utilization? It's always good.
Okay. All right, so I'm Christy DeMaster, the town's TIF consultant on this project. I did think it might be helpful to have a presentation because there were some changes made to the draft project plan following the 2 public hearings that were held in the town. So they held hearings on October 10th and November 14th, and then there were some changes made to the plan, and that was recommended by the Plan Commission to the town board on November 26th. So I'll highlight some of those in case you've looked at a previous version of it. So this is being done under Wisconsin statute 60.23 that allows towns to have the powers of cities to create a TIF district if they meet some criteria criteria regarding population and equalized value and sewer service. The area that's within the proposed district is subject to a sewer and water service agreement with the city of Waukesha dating back to 1988. Most of the properties in the district have both sewer and water service at this time. I did bring some maps of those areas if you're interested in looking at that. And this area is provided for in the agreement for Waukesha water diversion. It's included in the area as part of that service area. So, moving on, this is the proposed location of the district along Sunset Drive. You've got the railroad tracks to the east, and then you've got Industrial Lane, Prairie Avenue, and Center Road. The properties in yellow are currently zoned residential. The properties in red are zoned for commercial uses, and then the purple is zoned for manufacturing. There are a number of properties within the area zoned for commercial that are existing residential. So if you go to the next one. There's a variety of conditions present in this area. There are a couple of properties that were more recently developed. When I say more recently, I mean since 2000. There was a couple of vacant lots that were developed since 2000. Abra Auto and Midwest Plumbing are two examples of that. And then there was one that was redeveloped this last year. The Storage Master site, if you're familiar with that, it was a small kind of residential converted to business that was torn down and that was built there. But there are a number of non-conforming or incompatible residential uses in the district. Other than Storage Master, a lot of the lots within the area are very narrow lots. And then there's been piecemeal conversion of residential to business. So if you can flip to the next one. Just a couple quick highlights here. So this shows the average value per acre for all of the existing residential uses in the district. So they're at about $321,000 per acre. If you go to the next slide, we've got that industrial area along Industrial Lane, again, pretty low value per acre. And then if you look at the commercial along Sunset on the next slide, that is still fairly low. There's a couple of properties in there that are a little bit higher value. The Abra Auto is one example, and Storage Master. If you flip to the next slide, this just shows some values kind of on the same scale for other properties that have been developed recently along Sunset Drive. So it's an area that has some potential, but typically what you're seeing is that the properties that have been more recently developed were vacant lots or outlots, or a situation like Storage Master where there was a fairly small building and it didn't require assembling multiple properties. If you want to flip to the next one, that's just an aerial view of the Storage Master site before that was redeveloped. And there's some interest in expanding that business to the west. Along Prairie Avenue, there's a number of residential properties there that are non-conforming uses. If you flip to the next one. Another issue in this area is this Industrial Lane. The portion that's within the town is quite narrow and does not have curb and gutter or storm sewer. The areas that we're pointing to there with the red arrows. South of there, you'll see once you get in, it's a little hard to see in there, but once you get into the city, that is a more urban cross-section, 50 feet wide of pavement versus 30 feet. And I understand that causes some issues for heavy truck traffic from time to time. Continuing on, this is another just a zoom in on Industrial Lane, and you'll see that the black lines there indicate the right-of-way, and you have some issues with cars parking in the right-of-way currently. Continuing on, this just shows what the proposed uses are. We're not really planning to change uses per se. We keep everything consistent with what's in the town's comprehensive plan and the existing zoning. The properties in yellow that are zoned for residential, the concept there is that those could be potentially redeveloped for senior housing, which is consistent with the town's comprehensive plan and is also allowed as a conditional use within that current zoning. And then the other properties that are particularly low value within this area or underutilized at this time could potentially be assembled and developed more intensively. If you want to, so this just shows the from the project plan potential values, potential areas that we see that could be subject to redevelopment, and the concept here is basically that those really particularly low property value properties could be put to a higher use in terms of value per acre, and also provide some senior housing in the area. And so we're looking at about 13.2 or 3 million of additional increment from that. Moving on. So this is conceived of as a pay-as-you-go district where the town would have developer agreements with property owners that want to come forward and do something with their property. They would look at whether there's a financial need for a particular project to support either property assembly or demolition or on-site improvements. Like, for example, with Storage Master, there was some significant on-site stormwater improvements that were needed in that case, things like that. And they would be provided on a pay-as-you-go basis, so the developer would do the project and then the town would reimburse from the tax increment as it comes in. Reconstruction of an industrial lane, while it is important to support development in this area, in the original draft, part of that was envisioned as being paid for with TID revenues. In the revised draft, we're treating that as a non-project cost that would be funded by the town in support of this. And so that would free up some more dollars towards development incentives. And this is just a diagram of how this would work. Again, I think I already kind of went through that, so we can skip through that part of it. And again, this is what we're envisioning for actually project costs. So we're looking at potentially having about $2.3 million worth of development incentives to be available, again, depending on the timing and the value of new development within the district. So with the actual on-site improvements plus some kind of spillover economic value increase, we're looking at, we think conservatively, about an 85% increase in property value overall within the district, or about 16.3 million. And if you want to go to the next one, so that would, at full build-out yield about $190,000 of additional tax revenues per year. So that would be this district, with being a mixed use, it could go through 2040. We're planning to close it down by 2038. So through 2038, that would be about 2.3 million of TID revenues. And that just shows a projected cash flow. Again, we're taking the approach that this is we don't want to put the town and the TID at any risk, so we would match the development incentives to the actual TIF revenues. Thank you.
Ready.
Thank you. I looked at the proposed, I guess, the draft of the TID, and then I compared it to the one that was presented in our packet. I did notice that the street improvements to Imperial were removed, but then your explanation that it's going to be funded by the town answers that. Mm-hmm. I guess the question, a couple of questions. One is the development that you talk about in your second revised draft, I guess, mm-hmm. There's a lot of mays. The town may enter in agreements with the owners and developers. Development incentives may be provided. I don't see any specific plan mm-hmm. to any particular development. My understanding of the areas, there's one vacant lot. You talk about expanding Storage Master, mm-hmm. but my comments on Storage Master is they did that without a TIF, or without a TID.
Yep.
Blifford, they did that also without a TIF,
yep.
or without a TID. The residents that are on the south side of Sunset, you talked about rezoning it. My understanding is the town of Waukesha doesn't have the zoning authority for that.
No, it doesn't need to be rezoned. That use is allowed within the existing zoning, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm trying to get the reason behind this. I don't think the town's been able to point to one development
sure.
or even a bunch of developments that will happen. My read of this, and it could be wrong, is that this TID, if it's granted, nothing could happen. There's no obligatory project. There's nothing that we can
sure.
point to.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Well, I mean, one thing I would just like to comment on with that is, and it says right on the Department of Revenue's website that, adopting a TID project plan does not mean that all of the project plan expenditures will take place. It is a plan. It's a guide. It is something that would enable the town to do this. The town has had some discussions with developers that are interested in potential a couple different sites within this district. But it's more just about making that tool available to the town to do this, because this area has not had a lot of action happening. I know you mentioned Blifford, and then they did some facade improvements. That's a pretty low value improvement to that property. And yes, Storage Master did do that one on their own. I just want to look up the numbers here, but I mean that before they developed it, so that's about a 2.8 acre site. Prior to them redeveloping that site, there were the land value was $288,000, and the improvements were just under $115,000. So that site was the lowest value property in the area at $143,000 per acre. If you look at the properties to the west of the existing Storage Master building, you've got, and it was one single property. So if you look at those properties next to it, they would have to acquire 6 or 7 properties to do something similar to what they did on that site. And if you look at what those are valued at currently, let me just grab this here in total. So the equalized value of those properties to the west right now totals about $1 million, or $347,000 per acre. So it's kind of in that spot where it's quite a bit more property assembly that they would have to do, and a lot more cost to get that site, and also more cost. You're talking about demolishing multiple homes versus one building and things like that. So it is a very different situation than what they did with the property that they're on now. So.
Could I have one follow-up
Yes,
question?
Sure can.
There's a lot of may, but, no particular plan. We know that Storage Master would like to, and, by the way, I apologize that, I'm John Macy, I'm the town attorney. Want to address the member's first question about a lot of may.
Yeah, no, there is a lot of may in there, because yes, there's not one big project ready to go like you may see with some other TIF districts where it's a big property that's owned by one person and going to put in infrastructure that, city's going to borrow a lot of money and put in roads or sewer or water or whatever the improvements are necessary. No, this one is a different situation. There's definitely a lot of potential there, but it's going to be multiple different projects that are occurring at different times. And that's really and I've worked in other districts like this where, there's a plan put together. These are a bunch of different sites that we think really have a lot of potential, but will need some help. And this gives the community a tool to do those as they come up. So.
Just that begs, if I may, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, definitely.
It begs the question, and maybe Attorney Macy can address this. The but-for test. But for the TIF or the TID, how do you pass that test? How can you say if you can't, but for the TID, my understanding is, the rule is, but for the TID, these developments would not happen. So what developments are we talking, and what developments would not happen without this TID?
Well, generally, I think the answer to your question is we firmly believe we meet the but-for test. If nothing has happened there, nothing will happen. The Storage Master Group has tried to expand and has not been able to do so. We have 3 potential developers, none who will commit until there's a TIF. So it's a little, the classic chicken or the egg, build it and see if they come, this type of situation. We know what the projects are. We know that Storage Master is interested. They bought one parcel along the road and they've been stymied. Continue with their project. And the other 2 developers, one is a successful developer in the town who has recently finished a large development on the other side of town, is waiting to see what happens. And then we were approached by another experienced developer in the town who said, we can't do this without a TIF. So I think because I'm sure you've studied the statute, you've looked at many of these, there's no requirement, there's no requirement that there be a developer. I think you'll agree with that, and so this is the program to redevelop this area. Everyone knows this area is ripe for development. You just look at all the areas in the city, along this same road that they are in the process through their current TIFs or, future TIFs and are redeveloping. I mean, they just announced one, down the road, didn't they, for the Fox You know, has that come through yet, the new one, or has that just been the announcement?
I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
No, redevelopment of the Century, and, you know, has that come through yet, or has that just been in the press? I'm sure that's, you know, there's a major TIF being planned for that. And so, I mean, that's our answer. We firmly believe we meet the, you know, but for the test.
Well, and I think it's a different question to say, will this definitely happen if we approve this TIF district versus saying, will it happen if we don't? And so, you know, there's no requirement that just because it goes into a TID project plan that every single thing that's in the plan gets done. So, you know, that's a different requirement than saying this would not happen but for this assistance.
Anything else, sir?
Sorry, one more. You cited a 1988 city agreement regarding connection to sewer and water, I believe, because I thought the mayor's position was that he was not going to connect and didn't have to. Am I off on my understanding of the mayor's? Okay, so the
We
town's
have the
position is that's
agreement.
binding.
We
Okay.
have the agreement, and they made comments about how they didn't have to connect. We don't know where that's coming from. I mean, the mere fact that Service Master?
Service Master has sewer service.
Service Master is a brand-new building, and it has sewer. You know, and actually, the whole history, going all the way back to the huge senior complex, which is behind the strip mall in that area, which is in the town, wasn't there when they hooked up. So to say they're only going to provide service to existing buildings is there's no history of that, and there's no experience with that. The contract doesn't say that. It says they will provide service to those properties. So I think that was the mayor's letter, but also in their presentation, I don't know where they would be getting that from, because that's not what the agreement says, and that's not what the past practice has been. You have anything to add on that?
The agreement just covers Sunset and easement properties?
It's a very small area.
Yeah, it's
It
island
covered a lot
project.
of things, sidewalks and road redevelopment, and if you've looked at the agreement, but the area is,
Helpful, yeah.
it's Sunset Drive from Century Drive to the Sioux Line Railroad is one paragraph. I don't want to, you know, goes all the way out to Center Road from Mulberry Lane to Green Valley Drive. I mean, and there's different rules and different requirements through the whole agreement. You know, it is agreed that sanitary services, the sanitary sewer and water service to the town residents is agreed that sanitary sewer service, page 6, will be provided by the city to the property owners within the town whose property abuts the right-of-way of the following described streets: Sunset Drive, Center Road, Emmett Avenue, Minor Lane. It's pretty straightforward.
The red properties on that map show properties that are currently connected to sewer, but all of the properties within this district are covered by that agreement. So there are a few that don't have it yet, but.
The vast majority of the agreement talks about who's paying for what. We all know that. If you look at it, it's pretty clear. But if you just look at page 6, and so I don't know if he, in his letter, I don't recall him referencing any specifics. That's why I came prepared to reference D on page 6. And past practice has not shown that to be the case either, some of the representations they've made. So I can't say anything more than that, you know, other than we think the agreement speaks for itself, is pretty clear. And it's in the documents that I'm sure staff's provided, in all those documents that
Copy of the agreement, yeah. Should be.
no, that's where yeah.
Other questions? Como.
When did the town start discussing the TID?
I got a call back in July, I believe.
So a few months.
Yeah. That doesn't mean they weren't talking about it before that, but that's when I was.
6 or 7 months.
Yeah.
I can't say. Trying to think if we were talking about the redevelopment of the other potential sites prior to that or not, but I would have to check my records.
So what's driving this? What is driving this TID?
John mentioned there's several developers that have been coming forward to talk about particular areas within this district, and there's just some big obstacles to doing what they're talking about doing.
And that just happened in the last 6 months?
Well, the storage one did. We were told he was trying to accumulate the properties, and he's been stymied and unable to finish his project. That's if he'd bought up the entire road, maybe we wouldn't be here, but he can't. He needs the TIF.
Did you have a comment, Corey?
I
Or a
did, and it
question
begs
on
the
that?
question, and this isn't meant to be inflammatory or accusatory. We read the papers, we research this stuff before we come in here. The scuttlebutt among many people is that the town is doing this as a pretext so they cannot be annexed, and it's a step towards incorporation, I believe. My terms are correct? Because the answer that was just presented now, as to why now, and what's the burning, the answer is why? Why now? As opposed to a year ago or 6 months or a year from now, I think a lot of people would say, it's because the town doesn't want to be annexed. Is there a response to that?
Well, my response would be that you have a statutory authority and limited jurisdiction, and I don't believe that under the statute, the board is to take politics into consideration. I think it would be totally inappropriate for the board to leave its statutory duties and not obey the law. I have a question in my own mind as to whether this is common practice, how much as we appreciate the opportunity coming in and presenting. I've not been able to find a single agenda where any time the city was ever requested to appear before yourself.
Yes, they have. So I've
Little school.
several times.
Okay,
I've
I
represented
just- all
our
I could
district
do was
for
check
over 6
agendas
years, and we invite every TIF, we invite them in
For any project.
over this last 5 or 6 years. We don't have to either. It's at our discretion.
Okay.
And you can come if you want or you
Does it always go to
don't.
the school board or to the entire board?
To the Finance and Facility Committee.
Okay, but does it go for an action to the board? Because I looked at the agendas for
No,
the
it does,
last 3 or 4 years.
it does
and I-
not.
Okay.
It does not go as an action to the full board.
Okay.
This is an advisory committee to the person who represents the district for the Joint Review Board, and that is Todd Gray. The president assigns that responsibility to whomever the president wants. I have been that person for the past 5 years, and this year I've been super busy, so I decided to give that to Dr. Gray, sir. And this has been done in the past.
But I see it's
And
on
we're
the
just
school board agenda
asking,
next
we're just
Thursday.
asking basic questions to try and get a feel for this TID.
But why
how
would
this
that
came
matter under your statutory authority, whether we're trying to protect our borders as a town and not be annexed away by the city, and whether we have a limited opportunity under the law to,
I just asked a simple question, sir. I asked a very simple question. When did you start talking about this? Is it part of a master plan? I didn't even get to that. Is it? I'm just trying to get a
currently
feel.
there is
I
a-
don't follow what the town does and doesn't do on a regular basis, and I'm just trying to get a feel for if was this part of a bigger plan?
Yes, there are 3 cooperative agreements being worked on as part of a bigger plan, and there's plans for sewer and water to be provided to another area, and once that's done, there may be another request for a TIF to redevelop that area also. There's the potential plan for redevelopment of the town hall site, and that one may or may not meet the requirements of a TIF district. So yes, there is a master plan in place to develop portions of the town that don't seem to be able to develop. Now,
And this was part of the master plan, this area.
part of our comprehensive plan, or is that what you're speaking of? The
I'm just asking where it fits
66.1001?
in. Where it fits in to your organization and your planning, that's all.
I can tell you that this town, along with every town, of which many I represent, is constantly trying to determine what's the best methodology to preserve its borders so it can provide services to its citizens.
Okay, fair
And the
enough.
more land that gets annexed away, the less people pay taxes and the less ability there is to provide services.
Fair enough.
And so, is it a master plan? I can tell you since when I started in 1979, there isn't a town in this county that I work for that doesn't have a master plan in their mind of trying to preserve their borders.
Well, I can also tell you, sir, that most TIFs, the majority of them, that this board has been comfortable with, has had projects that are very specific as to what's driving them. And this has none. This has
Aware of that.
zero.
And the statute does not
And,
require it.
and
all we do is
excuse me,
ask-
sir, I didn't ask you a question. I did not ask you a question. And I'm feeling very uncomfortable with this not having any major projects moving forward. It took the town of Brookfield a couple of years to get their TID district developed and worked through with the 5 JRB representatives. Why? Because there were questions and there were concerns. So as far as I'm concerned, one of our biggest concerns is there are no specific projects. There are no businesses driving this. Now, that might not be the opinion of my fellow board members here, but I'm very concerned about that, and I'm very concerned about you being super defensive. I have no further comment, Mr. Chair.
Corey?
Yes. Attorney Macy, you suggested that there's a statute that prohibits me from bringing into consideration politics. If you could cite that, I'd like to know if I'm violating a statute. The question I had as to why, I think you answered. I think it is the answer that the town is trying to protect its borders. The question is why that concerns me and why, if there's a political motivation behind this, why it's concerning to me is because by doing this, not only are you taking, not you, the town, it's making everybody do all this work, read these plans, examine it, goes to the Joint Review Board, goes to the city. If it's merely to protect your borders by using a statute that is, I think, going to expire in June or so, I think that's why it's concerning to me. Internal politics of the town of Waukesha, I could care less about. But if I'm going to be told by a fellow attorney that I'm somehow violating the law or implied that I am, I'd like to know what law I'm violating, because I certainly don't want to do that. And I'm not trying to be argumentative with you. You and I sit on the board together. I've known you for some time. But I think questions, this is an advisory to Dr. Gray. I am not aware of anything that we violated in bringing in those issues. When the board requests, the committee requests that representatives from the town of Waukesha come, I'm going to research the town of Waukesha's position that's public and everything I can find. I'm going to anticipate, I'm going to read everything I did. I've highlighted it, I took the time to do that. I'm going to say, what's the other side of the argument? What am I missing? What are they not going to present to me? So I'm disappointed to feel like my question was improper. If it was improper, please let me know and I'll remedy
Certainly
it.
don't think the question's improper. I said, I think that the statute reads that you're to consider certain things, okay? I like to give
Being the board?
the board,
Okay.
the review board.
The Joint
Joint
Review Board.
Review
Joint
Board.
This is
Review
not the
Board.
Joint Review Board.
The joint review board shall but if
We're
you,
advising the Joint Review Board.
Reviving one member of the,
Yes,
right, who can,
our representative.
Right.
Correct, Corey.
okay,
Yes.
I didn't mean to correct you.
Yes.
Okay.
No, you are correct.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
no, I'm just, the statute reads the board shall review the public record, planning documents, and the resolution passed by the local legislative body or plan commission, subject to certain ports. So it's whether you determine whether or not you believe this is quasi-judicial or not, and whether you can reach out and base it on absolutely anything you want, or whether. Now, we recently, as an example, and anyone who knows me knows I like to give examples outside of what we're speaking about. It maybe lowers the issue. When the cooperative boundary agreement between the village of Mugwanago and the town of Vernon was sent back, the DOA had a very specific list of things that they could look to. And I take the same position with TIF. There's things that are required to be in this plan. I believe the consultant has worked very hard to put the plan in proper form and meet all the statutory requirements, and I think that's the way it's supposed to be treated. So that's my position. It says specifically you're to look at now, you can define public record, I guess, as you want. If this is quasi-judicial, it's what's in the record, not what you read in the paper or what you know. We can talk about all kinds of aspects of the incorporation law and the sunset and things like that. I mean, I find it ironic that Paul Farrow has written general comments. You've probably all seen it. I'm sure you read this. He voted for this law. He passed this incorporation law as one of his last acts as senator to this district. And then he puts that opinion in the paper.
Wasn't that specifically tailored for a certain, I forgot what the organization was. It was meant to remedy one particular, the state statute that allowed the town to move at this time. It was specifically tailored for one instance, correct? It wasn't meant to be
You can
broad?
make that, no, you can make that argument, but that's not what they wrote. Not like when they wrote the TIF district, and now we can speak specifically, and I respect the members. Do you know how many times Paul Farrow called me to say, I wish the town of Brookfield would tell us what they really want because I'm sick of going back and amending this ordinance, the state statute? Because TIF, was, and that TIF district, as you know, was written for 2 communities and specifically says, town of Brookfield, I can bring it up, 60, in the part of 66, the earlier part of 66, we're in a different portion of the chapter. The incorporation law was not written that way. It was written that any community, and there are 2 parts to it. There's the 8-point part that 4 or 5 of the towns in Waukesha County are working under, and then if, we know all about it, we can talk about it, but I really think this is my opinion, that it's not only immaterial, it's not appropriate to look to the politics of the situation. And I don't think the county has ever done that in the past when it's come to border agreements or border wars. The county and the school district, I respect, fully, has always stayed out of those issues and not put themselves in the middle. I'm shocked that Paul Farrow did this because the county has never done that before. And I worked with Norm Cummings for how many years that you would have sat on the board with him. He didn't look to politics. He did not look to border agreements. I know he looked to residential a lot because you guys talked about that a lot. We're very familiar with how Mr. Cummings felt about TIF districts and residential development. But I think, sir, you were there. Politics did not come into it. And the border wars and the disagreements between the communities, I hope that never came into the TIF discussions.
From a process perspective, though, Mr. Macy, we have always handled things this way with this board for many years, where we invite the district in, or the municipality in, that wants to have the TID created. The latest example was for the baseball park over here that the city wanted to create, TID 26. They came in, they made their presentation, we asked our questions. So we've been doing this as part of our process for many years. The board doesn't formally vote on what our GRB representative does, though. That person listens, so Todd Gray is listening to this discussion and takes that into consideration.
And I appreciate that, and thank you for educating me. And I mean that seriously, because both the consultant and I spent several hours this afternoon going through your website and all your minutes, and obviously this committee's minutes and old agendas are not on the website. And so we should have come and done our homework, and
No, they are. They're on the website.
I couldn't find
you should be able
the
to,
committee.
You should be able to go to YouTube also, and you can go and watch what the committee meeting was all about when TID 26 came forward
That's why
from
we asked the
the city of Waukesha.
That's why we asked the question, because we couldn't find it.
Yeah, it was just a few months ago, actually. July,
Yeah, I think it was
August. Yeah.
Yeah. it was in December.
So we didn't just create this process for tonight.
And again,
We've been doing this
thank you
a
for
while.
educating me. I appreciate that, because we weren't able to find it. We wanted to be as prepared as we could be to find out what type of questions or concerns the committees had in the past in these regards. And I'm glad to hear that we're going to be treated the same as everybody else. That's all we ask.
If I may, I had a follow-up question to your comment earlier about specific projects. I mean, with a situation like this where we're talking about 5 or 6 or 7 different things that would happen in this area over the course of the time, as opposed to one big development. I mean, because we're talking about senior housing in one area and maybe storage master expansion, or senior housing in another area, new manufacturing, things like that. I mean, are you saying you would expect the town to have all of those
It'd be nice
developers?
to have a few. It'd be nice to have a few lined up.
All of them lined up
Have have at least a start somewhere, but there's
there, as Don has talked about, there's one that's ready to go pretty soon. It's just a matter of not having the tool in place. But I've also...
What are those details? What does that look like? And that's the kind of details we're used to getting. Here are the things that we have lined up. Here are the details. We don't have any details. I mean, this is all, it may happen.
Well, in my experience has been that it works better from a risk standpoint, especially in a situation like this, to work on these things as they come up and determine whether a specific project merits the development incentives and to what level it merits development incentives, as opposed to going out and borrowing money and putting the TID on the line. And I know, especially with a lot of TIFs around the state, there's been issues with them going negative. Waukesha has a number that have done so. So
I have had to vote on essentially having successful TIDs for the city of Waukesha, pay for unsuccessful TIDs, close those unsuccessful TIDs by utilizing the funds of the successful ones. So not all of them work out.
Yep.
Even in the areas that are really blighted. Mm-hmm. And actually, the most blighted areas are the ones that have a tendency to maybe not always work out. So there were a couple over the last, if you go back and you look at the history of the city of Waukesha, look at the last 3 or 4 years, and you'll see what we had done to consolidate and to close down many TIDs. And all of those also started out with really, ambitious plans, but without very specific details on what those are. And so I have a tendency to just be more comfortable with the greater amount of details and knowing that there are some projects in place that are going to drive this thing. And I understand this is a little bit different in terms of it's not like just west of you on Sunset, TID 14, where there was a major development going on in a lot of space, which was opened up by Godfrey closing down many years ago. So I get that. It'd sure be nice to see what some of the details are for at least a few of the projects. Have something. Right now, there's nothing.
well, it's going to take some time. I mean, this area has had three things happen over the last 20 years, so it will take some time to put those together.
So what's the time frame on industrial, rebuilding industrial in Sioux Lane?
I believe we're looking at probably 2023.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're looking about 3 years until that happens? Yes, sir.
How did you determine your projections of the timing? So on your page 8, what was driving that? And I saw some of your footnotes. If you take a look at the your commercial estimate of the incremental value, you took the average of the 4 highest.
Right.
And then for the industrial zone, you took the highest value.
Correct.
Is that really, I'm just trying to understand why you did that. And I thought I heard you say you were conservative with your estimates. I don't remember what part you said you were conservative with, though.
Okay. Well, to talk about the estimates, yes, we did use estimates from other properties within this district, within this area that have redeveloped recently, because they are the most similar in terms of property sizes and location. In terms of timing, the commercial starting in 2021, that's the expansion of Storage Master. That could potentially happen sooner, but just from a conservative forecasting perspective, to assemble the properties and do the demolition and all of that. We wouldn't want to count on having that tax increment on the books by January 1 of 2021. So we put that into 2021 instead of 2020. The senior housing, again, that was based on discussions with the developer who was interested in doing some senior housing in the district, and some other similar projects that he has done recently. And I do think these are fairly conservative projections in terms of both timing and dollar amount per acre, because they are based on other very similarly situated properties within the district.
And you're looking, are you saying that this would be fully built out by 2020, by the end of 2027?
Potentially, yes.
That seems pretty aggressive to me.
Okay. And we did want to structure this the way we did as a pay-as-you-go, because you're very correct in that the timing of things really impacts how much you have available. So if projects happen sooner rather than later, that increases the amount that you can offer as a development incentive. So, yes.
And I applaud you doing pay-as-you-go. That's much nicer to your for your constituents. So
I've had
and
good
taking on less
success
risk.
with that in
So
other
let
locations.
them
and-
take on the risk as opposed to
Exactly.
the constituents. Yep.
Anything else?
Appreciate it.
Alrighty, so I'm very familiar with the area. There's a lot of opportunity, especially off in industrial. A lot of cleanup, though.
Yes.
Especially when you get to Chase Oil and what used to be back there. However, the TIFs in the city of Waukesha that have failed the worst are the vaguest.
Okay.
And that is my concern, along with Mr. Como. The city has come to us several times to get a TIF in with no discernible, this may happen, and yeah, we had to buy them out. They had to be bought out. So that's my concern. That being said, there is a lot of opportunity, especially industrial opportunity on Industrial Lane, but, you can get a railroad spur there in the whole shot. So, but you would have to have something, I'd love to see something.
Yeah.
Like you said, Midwest Plumbing did it on their own.
That was a vacant lot before they developed there.
That was Bob's lot. So, and J&L Oil, which is where the Abra or whatever, they did that on their own too. And Home Supply, which was Blifford, they did that. And I want to say the Service Master was Dowdle Drywall. They ripped down that building and put that up, and they did that on their own as well. I know there's a lot of hodgepodge of ordinances related to those houses, whether they have stone faces in order to get a business in them.
Which houses?
The ones on Sunset.
Yeah, we're not anticipating those to be used for business. Those are zoned residential, so that's where we were looking at potentially for senior housing.
For senior housing,
Yeah.
ripping them down
Yeah.
and getting those out, because there are some
Yeah.
businesses in there right now.
And they're non-conforming then, because there's no R3, and then it's
Yeah.
the same thing too. There's some residential in the area that's zoned commercial that's non-conforming, both along Prairie Avenue, and then there's one kind of like 3 lots in from Prairie on the south side. So yeah, it is a hodgepodge. And I agree that there's a lot of potential there, but the ones you're mentioning, were very different circumstances from what's left there. And I just want to circle around back to what you said about the TIDs that get into trouble. And that's why we're proposing this as a pay-as-you-go, where,
Right, and that is definitely the remedy to,
because I understand, yeah, and
Sure.
I've seen that too, and I
yeah. and
Don't
like
want
Mr. Como said, that's much appreciated, because that is a good stopgap to, Okay, any other discussions, questions? No? Excellent. Alrighty, well, thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated. We get to get a little bit deeper into it. You could have brought us in there.
and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that brings our discussion items to a close. Next up is information items.
Michelle Whiteworth's here to We issued bonds for 45, $60 million, November of 18 referendum. We'll talk a little bit about.
The mic on?
All right. To talk a little bit about the second draw on the referendum, the remaining $15 million and the timing of that. We touched on that a couple months ago or 3 months ago. Michelle was here. And then we laying out some projections of how this could play out. It's not a definite plan because a lot of it's dependent on the defeasance process that we went through this year. And as we talked about at that time, that's an annual decision based on how our overall tax rate's looking and other factors. But we wanted to lay out what could be, and then obviously we'll manage it year to year. So I'll turn it over to Michelle, and she can walk you through her presentation.
That's great. Thank you. Good evening. So, as Darren said, we just want to kind of set up this next phase of the referendum financing. This will be the final phase of the financing for the successful referendum. So this first page gives you what we're calling the base financing plan, which as I get older, I have a harder time seeing. We like to put a lot of numbers on a page. So I swear I could see this perfectly just like a year ago. So I'm not going to blame that on you. But anyway, as we lay out the financing plan for the referendum, what we're focused on here is all debt that is levied outside of revenue limits. So this is the energy efficiency financing, as well as the referendum approved debt. So the first column is existing debt before the referendum. You can see just a few payments out through 2021. Then we have the $45 million that we issued in June of 2019. That was a 10-year borrowing. The average or the all-inclusive interest rate on that borrowing was 2.08%. Then we have a placeholder for this next phase that we hope to be final within the next month or so, and that would be a bank loan. And the reason for that is the general obligation promissory notes that we issued as the first phase are not prepayable at any time. It's very customary for a municipal market issue to have some years that are non-callable, and that is the case with that issue. So the last three maturities of the GO promissory notes are prepayable, and they would be prepayable in 2026. So in the meantime, we want to have a piece of the financing plan that's fluid, that's flexible, that's eligible for prepayment at any time, and that's why we're looking at this next phase, doing it as a bank loan, which would give us that flexibility. The all-inclusive average rate at this time estimated on the bank loan is 2.17%, so we're still in an incredibly attractive interest rate environment. We would estimate that the first principal payment would be made on that issue in 2020 and would be about $4.6 million. That principal payment, combined with the principal payment you're making, the first principal payment you're making on the first phase of the referendum financing, you'll have about 20% of the principal repaid of the referendum borrowing in just the first year. So before even projects are going, you've already paid back about 20% of the principal outstanding, which is fantastic. Any other maturity that you see under the $15 million that are shaded in gray are prepayable at any time. So the bank would look at this as the scheduled amortization, but you would have the flexibility to prepay, and we're going to show you what that looks like on the next page. But this is what we're calling the base plan, what the amortization looks like if there were no prepayments whatsoever. You can see that the average tax impact over 2017-18 on the far right would be 63 cents, which is lower than what was talked about at referendum. I believe we discussed 72 cents. So if we turn the page, we just get a feel for what those example prepayments might look like. So inside the box, we've added another column, so the numbers get even smaller, of example prepayments. And those prepayments, we said, what would it take? How much in terms of prepayments on an annual basis would the district have to make to be debt-free by 2025? So to set yourself up with no debt remaining after 2025 payments for whatever comes next, whatever phase comes next of your comprehensive facilities and operating needs that you may have. This plan keeps the tax impact, again, well within what was discussed at referendum. The average impact over 2017-18, which was that base year we were comparing against at referendum, is 61 cents. And you can see the additional levies that would be required to kind of meet this. Now, this isn't going to be a requirement whatsoever. This is just really an illustration of what the prepayments might look like if you were to keep the debt service mill rate equal to what it is today. It's not any higher or any lower, and you would be essentially debt-free by your last payment would be in 2025. So the next couple pages just kind of summarize that in much bigger font, thank goodness. So we talk about, first of all, looking at the interest cost and the tax impacts and achieving what our referendum financing goals were. So first of all, actual interest rates and interest costs are significantly lower than what we talked about pre-referendum. So pre-referendum, the projected interest rate for phase 1 was 3.25%. The projected interest rate for phase 2 was 3.5%. The actual rate for phase 1, as we discussed on the previous page, was 2.08. To be determined what the final rate will be on this second phase, but as a placeholder and what we're looking at currently is 2.17%. So significantly lower interest rate, which results in lower interest cost, obviously, and lower tax impact. So this table inserted on this page shows you that. Pre-referendum, the net interest cost was estimated at $10.9 million. In the base scenario, that's no prepayments whatsoever, the interest cost is $6 million. The example prepayment scenario that we showed, which has you, again, debt-free after 2025, the total interest cost is $3.8 million. The mill rate impact goes from 72 cents pre-referendum to 63 cents on that base plan without any prepayments to 61 cents with the example prepayments. The repayment years go from 10 years total repayment to 6 years in that example prepayment scenario. So we know that prepayment scenario is going to change. That's the only thing we know for sure, is that it will change, and that will be a board decision, as Darren said, on an annual basis in terms of what you were levying for debt and how much you will prepay. But at least this second piece, this $15 million phase, will have that flexibility to prepay as much as you want in any given year. And again, as I mentioned before, you're going to have, that is scheduled, significant principal repayment in year 1 alone of 20% of what was approved at referendum.
It should also be noted that our defeasance still had us with the second lowest K-12 tax rate in the county as part of all of this. So I think there's a lot of factors when you look at this that makes me think that our overall operational levy is going to continue to at least be flat, if not decline slightly, as our loss of revenue limit authority, loss of resident students. So I told Todd this is all great news, but there's the opposite side of the conversation that we're losing revenue authority, but we'll focus on the good part of this tonight. So I think...
Talk about good news.
Yeah, right. So I think this is overall this is everything we've talked about hoping would happen. And in year 1, the board's willingness to defease those dollars is obviously the linchpin on that. But everything that we've talked about for a year or however long it's been is really starting to play out.
And play out better than what I thought, at least. I thought we would I would have been very happy at doing this in 8 years, or even 7 years. But to have everything done by 2025 without jacking up our mill rate, wow, I don't think it could play out any better.
And that illustration is to say that there's a path there, whether or not you achieve that path or not will be determined on an annual basis.
Each year we have to
at least
have this discussion.
Looks like. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think the one thing we do know at this point is it will be less than 10 years.
Right.
I think we can say that now.
Yes.
So we've at least got that. That's accomplished.
And I don't know what the average is of referendums, durations of the payback for your average referendum, but I think it's more than 10 years, the
Most of them
average.
are 20 years.
20
Yeah,
years,
We did
yeah.
that research prior to your referendum. It was 80% or so, and we just
I think
looked
it
at all the
was-
ones we've done and all the ones Baird has done, and between the two firms, we've done most of the school work. It was like.
I want to say like 5% were 10-year,
5%,
or
yeah.
4, or something tiny.
80 or so percent were 20-year.
Yeah.
And, yeah, less than 10% were 10 years.
We, Waukesha is pretty conservative, and I think we delivered a very conservative approach here that we've taken the whole time. And you see that in a lot of our planning. And we're very value-oriented, just like our constituents. They want a good bang for their buck, and they don't want to spend money frivolously. And I think we're living up to that. I mean, each of our constituents has to be a judge of that. But I think that this should be celebrated news if this board continues to want to pay this down quickly over the next several years. At least we have that option.
Right.
I wasn't sure what that option was going to look like at first. I
Yeah,
know.
and sometimes you have to really pay up for that option, for the prepayment flexibility, but in this case, you really don't. I mean, we're seeing very competitive rates come out of banks, rivaling what you can find in the market. So it's a good time to be executing this last phase.
Thank you.
Welcome. So the last page is just those next steps. So we're talking about this final phase of the referendum borrowing this evening. What we'd like to do is we work as financial advisor to the district. Baird has been hired as underwriter, in this case, placement agent, looking for that financial institution. So we'll be working with them to solicit interest from prospective purchasers, which would be financial institutions, throughout the rest of this month, and would be ready more than likely to come to the board on January 8th for final approval of that bank loan. So I say more than likely because we have to solicit interest and we have to make sure that the banks are willing to kind of work on the terms that we want to work with. So if it's not at the January 8th meeting, it would be no later than the February 12th board meeting. But I suspect that we'd be bringing it to you for approval at your first meeting in January. The closing date of these funds would be March 2nd of 2020. So final installment of $15 million would be done at that point, delivered to the account and invested as your other funds are over the life of the project.
Excellent. Any other comments? Questions? Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
Thanks,
time.
Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle.
Alrighty. Next up on information items would be the monthly budget update.
Excuse me. Okay. Everything is going as we expect for November. Really no huge revenues to report in November, but that's because a lot of our big money starts, I'm sorry, I've got a frog in my throat all of a sudden. Some of our bigger payments, including our equalization aid, came in December, so see more on that next month. From an expense perspective, salaries and benefits really are tying to where they were last year and in years past, which is good, because that's one of them that we really want to watch that trend to make sure that the percentages paid out are tying the same. Other than that, there really isn't anything major to discuss on expenditures. Overall, we've spent 24.67% of our general fund expenditures, and last year we were at 25.47, so really in line with where we expect to be. For Fund 27, we started getting our categorical aid in November, had a big payment of $943,000. Otherwise, again, same thing with Fund 10, salary and benefits are where we expect them to be. Other than that, not a lot of spending, and we're right in line with where we expect to be at this point in time for Fund 27. Excuse me. Fund 43, we don't really have any more revenue coming in other than interest until we do the borrow that Michelle was just speaking to. And our expenditures, our main ones were for Bray Architects and their work on the referendum projects. The only real news to talk about for Fund 43 is that we have met our spend down criteria for our December 13th deadline, the 6-month deadline. So we've met our 10% spend down and have had that confirmed by PMA. So that's good news.
Don't want to get in trouble.
Any questions on the actual budget before I move on to some of the health insurance and the dental insurance?
Just real quick, from a cash flow perspective, as you said, these are lean months. We're still fine.
We are. November is one of our leanest months, and we're good. We didn't feel the need to even do the line of credit this year because our cash flow is in very good position because of our fund balance. So November is one of our leanest months, and we're in good position.
Okay, just wanted to check.
We also wanted to shy away from the line of credit because if Michelle was here, she could explain it, but it does impact what we can borrow money on the referendum side of it.
Sure.
There's some IRS rules, if you can believe it, that would have hindered it slightly, not significantly.
The IRS probably counts whatever the maximum line is as debt.
Exactly.
I would imagine, so.
Our bank also added an additional fee this year in our contract for line of credit borrowing, which they've never had before, so it makes it just a little more of a conversation and when we do get back into that. Any other questions on that before we move on to the rest of it? Okay, tax collection, obviously nothing yet for November. We won't see any tax payments till January. For the self-funded insurance, our balance, now this is the liability account that Darren was speaking to, not the fund balance. So this is where we accumulate our day-to-day expenditures and revenues for the money that we put aside in there. And at the end of November, we are sitting at 2.2 million in balance, which is really good for this time of year, but we don't like to say that out loud because then something bad will happen. But I think mainly we haven't had the high-cost claims going into this year that we have had in the past year. So we still expect this time of year to be a little bit lower because people are paying their out-of-pocket expenditures and meeting their deductibles. And then once everybody meets their deductible, that's when the claims start to kick in more. So this time of year, the experience usually is looking a little bit better than, if things are going well, and things are going well. Any questions on the health before we move on to the new chart I added, which is basically the same thing as the last chart, only it's the dental. And, excuse me, we started our balance this year, our liability balance at $674,000, and ending in November is $524,000. Nothing to be really concerned about. People do all their work in the, summer when they have time off, so they're spending a lot more of their funds on the dental, and it isn't quite the same. It doesn't go by the plan year as far as where their deductibles come in, or not deductible, excuse me, their benefit comes into play. Our dental actually our benefit renews on January 1st to December 1st, so it's or December 31st, a little different than the health insurance. So people are off of work, so they're getting their work done over the summer. So we're starting, as you can see, though, the trend is starting to build back up again over the last 3 months after having July and August be heavy claim months. But we're very confident that we're in good position with that self-insured dental. Last year was the first year for that. Any questions on either of those, any of this?
I do have one question, which I
Yes.
noticed, and I don't really know what it is because I've never seen it. On page 6, up on the top, page in the thing, it is insurance and judgments. Budget is 25, if I'm reading it right. It says, do you see where that is? 10E 790?
10E, my page 6 must be a different.
Yeah, page 6, it's up in the highlighter.
He's going to print skyward.
Yeah, I'm in the
Oh, the
printout.
real page
Oh,
6.
Yeah, real, yeah.
Got it, sorry.
Not the
We like to
fake
confuse
page
you.
No,
eight.
it's up here. It's
Yeah,
up,
Skyward's
it's
not
the fake
yes,
page 8.
Skyward's page 6.
Got it.
It says other
790.
insurance
Oh,
judgments.
Yep,
I thought maybe we
so
had a medical emergency.
Page 8 of the
or something.
handout.
I,
the 136,000,
no, I'm
Question?
looking at 2019-20 budgets, 25,000. 19-20 year-to-date, 432,613.
Right, this
It's
is
a
because-
thousand.
This is because of the Summit View situation. What happened was, we used to put our revenue into that same account, and then the expenditures went out of that, and then the auditors this year said, no.
Oh.
Put the revenue in a revenue account, and I didn't adjust the budget accordingly. I apologize.
I would argue that's
I was
flooding a building
surprised
does
when I
not
saw
create revenue for anyone who's
Yes.
listening at home.
I would agree
Right.
with that.
It does
And
not
so- No, but the auditors feel it does, apparently, so.
It used to be nice, we'd zero out that account, and that way you'd know we've received everything in reimbursement that we
right,
should have.
yeah.
Or now they want us to pull it apart.
Okay.
And we're doing the math, but.
So that's something new.
It is something
Like,
new
that's
this
right,
year.
'cause I
That's
looked
why
at it,
it
I'm like,
stands
oh my
out. Yeah, and I probably should do a budget adjustment
Okay.
so it doesn't look so scary
I
as it
thought-
does, but that's the
I thought something
explanation.
really bad happened to somebody because, but, okay, so it's the summit thing.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes.
I did have one more question. Going,
And just so, I'm
Yes.
sorry,
Oh,
that's
just to finish up, that $25,000 we budget as kind of a deduct, you're going to have some
It's your
events.
deductible, yes, right,
Kind
exactly.
of a,
That-
like
yeah.
self-funding our deductible,
Right,
essentially,
okay.
what we're doing with the 25 grand.
Okay, thank you.
yeah, just real quick, the dental claims that you presented is the payable. So this is essentially like the equivalent of, we're just looking at the revenues and liabilities, just like we did for the health insurance.
Right, the upper half is the premium of what the district, so where it says revenue, it's
That's what we're collecting.
That's what the
Collecting from-
district is contributing and what we're also collecting. So it
Gotcha.
includes the employer portion and the employee portion that's expensed out every payroll. And so while it's an expense to the district, from a dental plan perspective, it's a revenue.
Okay, yep.
And the expenditures are
is-
the claims, the Delta Dental.
And this
census
is all
weekly.
part of Fund 10.
Correct.
And, but for this particular account, we do not have specific reserves, correct?
We don't have reserves, we don't have to put aside a reserve in our fund balance per se. Our reserve is actually our beginning balance in the liability account. And at some point, if that gets too high, we'll have to have a conversation about that.
Okay.
DPI doesn't have
And
real
if it gets too
guidelines
low, we'll
about.
have to have a conversation on that,
Yeah, that'll
too.
be a less fun conversation. But yes, correct.
So right, for now, we do not need to have a restricted reserve account for our self-funded
Dental, we
dental.
do not.
Okay,
With dental, you know your exposure.
Yeah, you do,
Correct.
100%.
Yeah,
The worst case is $2,000 for every employee who has the coverage, no matter what else happens, so.
that's our max benefit that we get, so.
Yeah, and no, the vast majority don't even hit that, and if HNI was still here, they could show you what the average utilization is over time, and it's pretty much a science for health insurance, as we know, it's what happened at the last dentist or doctor's appointment, so. So I don't see a time, but it would be the same exact process of us restricting fund balance if we
Okay.
chose to.
all right.
And we sat down and I don't have that number in front of me, and I apologize, and we looked at what would that magic number be if we paid out everybody's $2,000, and we haven't hit that in this beginning, in the balance yet. That's where if we get to that point, that's where we'd want to start having the conversation of, okay, this has gotten to be excess, and what do we do with it?
We have employees taking care of their teeth.
Yes, we do.
That's good.
Are there any other questions? Is that it?
That's it.
Excellent, thank you very much. Alrighty, next up on our information items would be our referendum project update.
Yeah, just a quick couple of items. We're kind of in a mad rush. On the backside of your executive summary, there's two topics I just wanted to touch on. I'll start with the release of the bid documents. We're bundling there's 4 schools having major work, all 3 of our larger middle schools, and then the addition at South. We're bundling those into 2 separate packages that will go out right after the first of the year, a couple days staggered. The reason we do that is if you bundled all of that work, which is really a lot of work, and you multiply that by being at 4 different sites, a lot of your mid-range companies can't take on
Right.
all of that. So by breaking it into two pieces, we hope to get a better response in the bid documents. So you can see this is the email from between Bray and Findorf. So the final sets will go out, like I said, the Thursday the 2nd for South and Butler, and then Horning and Les Paul will go out Monday the 6th. And when I said, well, why do we do it on two different dates? They said, you'll be shocked, but a lot of times when you do two packages, if you send them out on the same day, the bid responses get confused on. So that's why they're staggered. As I mentioned, there's some other districts in the executive summary. I mentioned there's one other significantly big referendum scope over in Wauwatosa. They're sending out, we've been told, their bid documents towards the mid to end of January, so we wanted to get out before they did. So the other item, and this is something that kind of just dawned on me, and we had talked about it as a construction team a couple of times, but never really dove into it. And that's furniture. And at Horning and Butler in particular, we're pretty much flipping all of the furniture out of that building. And it dawned on me in a meeting, I'm like, what are we going to do with all the old furniture? I don't have a warehouse. I would urge just not to get a warehouse because we would fill it.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, we would probably dispose of 90% of it
Right.
anyways. But coming up with some process, and I just really just off the top of my head, I have reached out to groups like the bilingual department, the YMCA about, would you have interest when it comes, where furniture would become available, trying to build up a network of people we can call kind of on short notice, but they'll need to come and get it.
Yeah.
I thought we have some online
Yep.
sales opportunities too, right?
We're trying to, certainly anything of higher value, we will put on the state surplus auction site, I think it's called, or something like that. We're also thinking of bundling desks, like, here's 50 desks. And it's not really a revenue generating thing, it's just so the things can be reused more so. But there might also come times where just based on the construction timeline that some decisions are just going to be made, and whether that means we don't have time to go through all that. So I just wanted to have you know that we're thinking of trying to maximize that exposure and the sale of these assets. Also, our schools will be able to eyeball some of this stuff as well. I don't know how much we're going to have, because do elementary schools want junior high sized furniture? I don't know. I'm not an elementary principal, but we also won't have the manpower if one school wants 3 desks and then I have to move 3 desks from that building to. So it's going to be some balance of all these things. So I just wanted you to know that we're going to do the best we can.
You've been staying up nights thinking about this stuff.
But what got me thinking about is Belinsky called, and that barn out there is our warehouse.
Yes.
And it's the one-way road. Stuff just goes there and it never.
Yeah. Right.
It never
Which
returns.
usually happens at a
So-
warehouse. That usually happens at a warehouse.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, so this is all we have. Again, the big thing is we're really making a strong push to get those. I know I saw South's bid docs, I think, are ready to roll. I won't be at the board meeting on Wednesday because we go before the Plan Commission Wednesday night, and they asked that I attend that meeting. And I've never gone through that, but I'm not sure I'm upgrading from the board meeting to the Plan Commission meeting. But
You're not.
in terms of time or topic, I'm not sure. So that's where we are. We're making really good progress, and we should have bid results by the end of January-ish, early February, and then we'll transition into the planning stages for our remaining elementary schools that we still have to address the secure entrance on. So,
Any questions on the referendum update? No? Alrighty, thank you very much, Darren. Next up is other business. Recommendations for future committee meetings. Does anybody have any? No? Okay, well, just make sure you email me or Darren or both of us if something pops up. Do we have a need to adjourn to executive session? Yes, sir. Thank you very much. So we're looking for a motion to adjourn to executive session. Mr. Como.
I move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, parent 1, parent E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons required a closed session. And this is with respect to the sale of the district property, and also Les Paul parking solution.
All right, is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you, Mrs. Voigt. This is a roll call? Is this a roll call?
Aye.
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 Excellent.
Mr. Chairman, will you be going back into open session?
Probably not.
I don't have the notice, so. Again, thank you for your time. I
Thank
know
you.
We're kicked out. Can we at least go around and say thank you?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Thank you for your time.
Police report.
I hope I didn't get too aggressive.